Good morning. Today we're going to talk about the High Middle Ages, or the Late Middle Ages, the end of the period we call Middle Ages, and the rise of what are known as nation states. So those are countries like we have today. So before this we had kings who were in charge of an area. If you look at the map on your paper, you can see we've got a whole bunch of different kingdoms here. Many of those will be joined together to form the countries we have today. So take your notes out, the sheet that's right here, turn to this page, pause the video until you get that done, and then hit play and proceed with the lecture. So these are the three countries that we have to worry about in our class: England, Spain, and France. These are their flags. So as we have been talking about for a few weeks, after the fall of Rome, or the Roman Empire, there wasn't any central authority, so there was no government to control people. The church filled a little bit of that, but they didn't have anyone to look to except for that time when Charlemagne, the king of the Franks that we saw, unites most of Europe during the 800s. About 1000, the year 1000, kings started to form kingdoms like we know them today. And the first one of those we'll look at will be in England. So the first king, most historians think the first king of England is this guy, Alfred the Great. In the 800s, he is going to take a group called the Anglo-Saxons and unite them. There was more than one guy who called himself king during this time. And to keep out the invading tribes, he's going to unite everyone together, defeat them, and start his kingdom. And so that is why he's called Alfred the Great, because he protects his people from these invaders and starts the country that becomes the country of England today. About 200 years later, in the year 1066, we have William the Conqueror, who is going to, it's actually French, he's Norman, which is Normandy, part of France, and he's going to claim to be the King of England and come over and invade a guy named Harold, who also thought he should be king, and he's going to win that battle. And when William takes over England, he's the guy who really unites most of what today is England into one country. So you can see here, Normandy was owned by William, and then he's going to take all of this, which is basically England today, and unite it together into one big country. The Normans also controlled some other areas down here, but this is what we're worried about for this particular class. The other things that happen in England that we are supposed to cover: Henry II, who's William's great-great-grandson, is going to develop something called common law. It's a big step forward. Eventually down the line it leads to democracy. But common law is the idea that anything that has happened before, so if you have gone into a trial and a decision was made on that crime, that the king or the noble or the judges eventually can look back and say, when this crime happens, this is the punishment. So that is common law. So we don't have laws written down like today, but you're able to look back and make sure the punishment is the same each time the crime happens. And that is still used in England today. Henry's son is probably the most famous English king in the Middle Ages. His name is Richard the Lionhearted. He is thought of to be one of the biggest English heroes in terms of kings. He actually spoke French, and he barely even went to England, but he's a hero. We will see exactly what he does later, but he goes down, fights in the Crusades, and he is really the one truly successful European that fights in the Crusades in the Middle Ages. And while he is out fighting, his brother King John is going to be in charge of England. He's eventually in the 1200s going to sign a paper called Magna Carta, which is the first time in history a king willingly limits his own power. And he does it here in Runnymede, this field in England. Basically, he's going back home. He's surrounded by the nobles, the knights, and they basically force him to sign this piece of paper saying that he is not going to make all the decisions for the country anymore. He's going to talk to the nobles, the other lords in the country. So they're his vassals, and he is going to let them give him advice on what happens in the Kingdom of England. And that is the start of what we have today in England called Parliament, and it's the basis for Congress in the United States. At the end of the Middle Ages, the last big thing is something called the 100 Years' War. It's a war fought between England and France. It's really what makes the modern country England. It unites the people together, and same thing for France. It's going to unite all of those Frankish people and make them think of themselves as one country instead of different tribes. So, 100 Years' War. It lasted about 100 years, as you probably guessed. It is between England and France, and it was fought over who should be the king of France. So, Edward III was English. He's actually Philip's vassal, but they each thought they should be the king of France. So the war is to decide which one of these guys should actually be king of France. If you're the king of England and you can conquer France too, then you would be the most powerful king in Europe at this time. You'd have an enormous kingdom. And so let's take a look at why the important things that happened during the 100 Years' War. One big advancement is the English are going to use something called the longbow. These bow and arrow can shoot farther. They're more accurate than most other European bows at the time, and so they're going to let the English attack from a long way away. They don't actually have to get close up. So it's a big advancement in war and technology. The other big changes are, instead of using knights, like the whole Middle Ages, if you needed to fight a war, you called your knights and had them come out and fight. This is the first time we're going to see an army that is in professional armies. They're not just guys who have come to help the king. The other things we see, the other big advancements are gunpowder is going to show up for the first time in Western war. So there's going to be cannons and handguns, like pistols. Would be a modern handgun. So they're guns that you hold in your hand. So these things are going to eventually make castles useless, because once you have a cannon, you can knock down a castle wall. So this is a very big war because it changes life after the war. And then, most importantly, this lady, Joan of Arc, becomes famous during the 100 Years' War. Before you go any further, I want you to look at those 4 pictures you have. So you have a picture of someone using a longbow and label longbow. You have a picture of a cannon. It's the one sitting on the ground. So label the big giant cannon on the ground. You have a statue of Joan of Arc. You need to label that. And you also have a handgun. So it's the long, skinny one. Then when you're done with that, we'll go back to France. So Hugh Capet, who you have already met earlier in our class, is going to be the guy who makes France Paris the capital of France. And his his descendants, not his ancestors, are going to gradually increase the land they control until, as your map that you have in your packet shows you, they have control of most of what today is France. And that is going to lead to the dispute that is the 100 Years' War with France. And that is going to make modern France, most of what we see here, this stuff too is part of France now, it's going to lead to the modern country of France. So the 100 Years' War between England and France helps define France as a nation. It's also going to be the war where we see this woman, Joan of Arc, and she is going to unify France. She is a young girl, about 14, who says she saw a vision from God, and he told her that she was going to lead the French to victory. So she actually dresses up in armor and goes out and leads armies. She ends up being great and leads the French to victory in multiple battles. Eventually she's going to be captured by the English, and they put her on trial and say she's a witch, and that is what these visions were, that she's not really somebody who God has chosen. Because if they admit that she is somebody who has a special connection in God, that means God wants the French to win this war. So they are actually going to burn her at the stake or set her on fire while she is alive until she's dead. So she is a saint, a Christian saint now. And those are the statues that you have seen of her on the horse. Which leads us to Spain, the country next to France. In Spain, we have two rulers, Ferdinand and Isabella, who are going to unite the country, kind of using Christianity. First thing they do is they get rid of those Muslims, the Moors that we have seen that invaded Europe. It's called the Reconquista, the reconquering. So they're going to take back the land from the Muslims in the southern part of Spain mostly. And perhaps most importantly, they are going to start colonizing in the Western Hemisphere. So Philip II is going to, whose great-grandparents were Ferdinand and Isabella, is going to spread the empire even further than before. So you can see on your map in your packet exactly how much land he is able to expand. All of the yellow things here are actually Spanish possessions, even though they are not in Spain, including Africa. So we have things that today are very, very different countries were controlled by Spain. Now, that's it for your notes. We will do a few more activities in class today. And if you have any questions about this, you need to make sure you ask, because you're going to have an exit ticket on this too.